do Christians view the culture around them? Do we just imitate the culture and accept it and go with it? Do we resist it or oppose it? How do we think about these issues with clarity and using principles grounded in Scripture rather than gut reactions or concerns or impulses? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to do it by reviewing a seminal work by H.R.Niebuhr, his 1950s book, Christ and Culture. He gave us some of the basic categories. Any book today on this topic has to look back at Niebuhr's work. So we're going to start there and talk about his work and the wisdom it offers us. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, I'm Joel Pelsu, president of Arts Entertainment Ministries, and our passion is helping you as a creative professional to succeed in your creative life while growing deeper in your spiritual walk. Because your creativity and your spirituality are designed by God to be working in concert with one another. And that's our passion. If that's your passion, take a second, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, and please share it with your friends so we can encourage them as well. Oh, and before we jump in, I want to let you know we have online courses for you about your calling as an artist, about theology and art, and a course called Catalyst, which teaches you about being an entrepreneur in the art world or entertainment industry. If you're going to succeed, you need to realize you are a business. You are an entrepreneur. Links are down below. I encourage you to check those out. We live in this world with all kinds of customs and traditions and conveniences, while at the same time, we're called to honor Christ with everything we do. Christ called us not to live as the world lives, merely going about our selfish pursuits. But God has also deeply loved us, and he commands us rather, to love others as he has loved us. Now, this brings up a host of challenges. What do we do when the values of our culture seem to be in opposition to what Christ has called us to do? Do we retreat, advance, compromise? How do we decide? Well, Niebuhr's book, Christ and Culture, was written to help us with just these sorts of questions. First, we have Christ against culture, which is anti-culture, or as he also calls in his book, radicalism. This is the idea that Christianity is fundamentally at odds with the culture around it. And the strength is that it focuses on purity and holiness, not being corrupted. The weakness is that it leads to isolation, and therefore a failure to follow the charge Christ gave us to be salt and light in the world. There's a simple metaphor to help us think about it. We need to get the salt out of the salt shaker, otherwise it's failing to fulfill its purpose. So we can't be salt and light as we're called to be in the world if we're always retreating from culture because we're going to be corrupted. We don't have confidence that he who is in me is greater than he that is in the world. And this view, typically the easy one to look at would be a fundamentalist. In the last century, a lot of Baptist churches had this view, Christ against culture, that we're to object and protest. And it's this relationship. Second, we have Christ of culture. Niebuhr also calls us the accommodator. We're accommodating the culture. This approach sees Christianity as a product of culture, reflecting and reinforcing its values. It tries to look for common places and common values both the church and culture share in common. The strength here is that it tries to connect cultural conversations with theological concerns. But the weakness is that most often this leads to a watering down of Christianity, if not complete compromise and loss of the identity of who Christ is, which we saw in the last century with many of the mainline denominations, the big old Presbyterians, Methodist, Anglican churches who tried to mesh with the culture and lost their distinctiveness. And they're not really preaching the gospel anymore. They've just become like everybody else. This is why so many of those big old churches are dying. It's not the gospel isn't true, or people want the gospel. It's those churches abandoned the gospel as it became just like the culture. And a simple metaphor for this is yeast. Galatians 5:9, Paul tells us, a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. Just as a little yeast makes the whole loaf of bread rise, so false teaching and cultural ideas embraced without discernment, little bit by little bit, infect the entire church, and they lead to heresy. It's very dangerous. Third, we have Christ above culture, or the synthesist. This approach views Christianity as transcending culture, but still influencing it. And this has been the dominant view in church history. We look back to Thomas Aquinas or Justin Martyr. They're great examples here. And they don't see the problem as between Christ and culture, but seem to combine Christ and culture. Think of the idea of a well-cultured woman who could also be called a godly woman. See, the aims of being cultured in quite a few places has great overlap with the fruit of the Spirit. Self-control, patience, kindness, gentleness. These are things that we want in society, and they are godly fruit of a spiritually mature person. We want our children to grow up to be smart, well-educated, wise, godly, loving others. And we see no contradiction here. This would make you a better citizen and more godly. Clement of Alexandria wrote how etiquette, manners, and decorum are befitting a Christian because it reflects the dignity of Christ and the love of others. So we see this synthesizing, as Niebuhr stated it, it is more concerned with the culture of Christians than with the Christianization of culture. He says it on page 128. Now, as for Aquinas, this arises from a focus on connecting reason and revelation, which was all Aquinas tried to do in Summa Theologica, nature and grace, creation, redemption, trying to connect all these things and see the commonalities and how it's anchored in biblical truths. The strength of this approach is the desire to see all of God's creation and culture in connection to the gospel and biblical principles. That's wonderful. Here's the problem with this view. It lacks exposure to other cultures and other historical contexts. What I mean is this. It all sounds fairly acceptable as long as the culture you're in is embracing principles that fit a biblical worldview. But the more a culture promotes selfishness or godless sentiments, the more this view becomes very impractical. You see, it doesn't work in a tribal, hedonistic culture or a cannibalistic culture. There's no way of redeeming those traditions and those ideas of pursuing hedonism and self-love or cannibalism. It would not have worked in Nazi Germany, which is where the church completely failed to resist because of views like this. We're trying to connect the church to what's going on culturally. There's a point to say, no, we're not connecting these things. The culture has abandoned anything that fits the gospel or a biblical worldview. It does not lead to human flourishing, and therefore we cannot endorse it. And we won't make that distinction if we're just trying to make the two work together. So even in our postmodern or post-postmodern era, this culture, there's such a focus on the self as the center of society and the celebration of pursuing freedom from any restraint. Well, this leads to freedom from any cultural morals or etiquette or respect for others. This is the opposite of what the culture of Aquinas and Alexandria of Clement lived in. So it doesn't work now the way it did then. In the end, people with this view tend to focus too much on preserving and restoring culture instead of proclaiming the gospel or evangelism or self-discipline and growing to be a godly person. This approach often leads to too many problems and contradictions that cannot be resolved. Fourth, we have Christ and culture in paradox, or dualist, as Niebuhr calls it. People embracing this approach recognize there's tension between Christianity and culture. With that in mind, they want to recognize that tension without feeling compelled to resolve it, to make it all one, like the synthesists, right? They recognize that we're sinners, and culture is broken and corrupted by sin. They also recognize God is holy and seeks to restore us and redeem us. But man and culture are stuck. We see God's grace breaking through, but it's temporary. The strength in this view is the honesty about our sinfulness and the brokenness of society. The weakness is that there is not a plan or ability to ever make progress if we're stuck in this state. And therefore, this approach can seem passive or just ambiguous. It keeps the tension, but there's no hope to it. This view may be true to experience, but as Niebuhr states, this is a report of experience rather than a plan of action or campaign. There's no strategy. So the best metaphor here might be footprints in the sand. Footprints left in the sand can show us that something was there. There was sort of an influence on the landscape, but in the long term, it disappears, has no permanent impact. And this is the problem. It leads to a hopelessness. We don't have a hope of God doing more, of redeeming more. We're just kind of stuck. We accept the tension, but there's no hope. The fifth view we have is Christ transforming culture, or as H.R. Niebuhr calls it, the conversionist. In this final approach to Christ and culture, we see men and women who recognize the sinfulness of man, the brokenness of culture, but they also recognize the power of God to redeem and transform cities, even all of creation, as we see in Romans 8. And Niebuhr suggests this approach is the most dynamic and constructive approach. It recognizes the goodness of creation, the active, redemptive work of God, and the role of Christian men and women as ambassadors for Christ wherever they live and work. We're to be his hands and feet, transforming culture so it is more blessed, more loving, more kind, more gracious. Here we see the call for Christianity to seek to transform culture by living out the life God calls us to live in love, to transform the various spheres of society so they become more like the way God calls us to live. And this scene is the best way to create human flourishing for the most people. The strength is it offers both hope and a strategy. So it's more encouraging to men and women to pursue active engagement with the culture while maintaining a commitment to Christian principles. The weakness is this view cannot be embraced with simple ideas. It's not simplistic. You can't use a bumper sticker slogan to fix this. Instead, it requires an approach with discernment and wisdom to really navigate effectively what the culture is trying to do, what the biblical principles are that come to bear. So you're challenging entrenched cultural systems that takes a lot more nuance and thought. So Niebuhr gives great praise to the conversionist approach that Christ transforms culture, but in the end he resists the temptation to lift up one approach as the ideal model for all cultures and situations. He recognizes how much various historical contexts have played a big part in these various perspectives, and he wants to remain humble in his final assessment. A simple metaphor that could be helpful is maybe a sculptor who's chipping away at a block of marble. It may not be clear immediately what God is doing, but God can use Christians and even institutions to transform a culture from unjust, chaotic, and hope-destroying into a culture that is just and dependable and life-giving. See, God's principles help us to see where to chip away, what to leave alone, and what to celebrate as we pursue this final statue, which is the transformation of culture into something beautiful. In my own conclusion, I found the Christ transforming culture to be the most compelling 25 years ago when I first read this book, and I still find that the most compelling today, though there are a few recent books with some interesting assessments and nuances regarding our culture, and I plan to review those books as well. That includes James Davison Hunter's book, To Change the World, Rod Dreher's book, The Benedict Option, Andrew Crouch's book, Culture Making, and let me know if there's another book that you think I should refer to that gives some more nuance or insight for our culture today. And let me know in the comments, which approach have you encountered in the churches you've attended or schools or universities? Each one seems to have their own bent on this. And does this help bring clarity to, as an artist, how do you engage the culture around you? How do you see your Christianity and its distinctiveness engaging the culture around you with love without compromising, without compromising your faith and the gospel and orthodoxy? And if you enjoyed this, check out our website and our online courses by clicking on one of the links down below. Take a second, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps. And I made a video about art in the Bible recently. I want you to check that out. The Bible talks about art, but we don't talk about this in Christian circles. It's extremely important Christians know this and talk about this. Why? Because if we don't believe art is important to God, we will never invest in the artists and filmmakers and video game developers who are believers, and we will never help those people become salt and light in the art world, the mainstream media, or the entertainment industry. Which means we will let the devil continue to dominate the film industry, the museums, the gaming world, and on and on and on. That's not only a tragedy, it's the result of horrible theology and a failure of the church to recognize how much God loves art, how God has always used art, and music and dance and storytelling to inspire his people and to tell the world about the beautiful, wonderful, and amazing nature of God himself. So, understanding art in the Bible, check out that video. It's essential to understanding God's heart for you as an artist. As always, I pray that God blesses you and equips you to be salt and light in a world that desperately needs it. Check out another one of our videos right here.